On this episode, we traveled to Gaithersburg, Maryland to learn about fire and evacuation research at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Then we look at the role of cognitive systems in managing large crowds. We visit the North American Handmade Bicycle Show in Richmond, Virginia. We meet a maker of bamboo bicycles. Finally, we meet a maker of titanium bicycles. Stay tuned. We're in Gaithersburg, Maryland, talking with Jason Averill at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. What is the institute?
NIST is part of the Department of Commerce. We're a non-regulatory agency which does research largely to put a technical basis to standards in the United States.
And what do you do for them?
I'm a group leader of the Engineered Fire Safety Group. Our fire research division does basic science and research to put a technical basis to much of the fire codes and standards in the United States.
NIST is hosting a conference this week. What's the name of the conference? What's it all about?
This is the 5th International Pedestrian and Evacuation Dynamics Conference. Very exciting. It's the first time that it's been in the United States. We have 130 plus attendees from 20 different countries, all here to talk about the underlying science of pedestrian and evacuation movement, whether it's from buildings during emergency circumstances or the use of buildings, subway stations for pedestrian and circulation movement.
How much similarity is there and how much difference is there between moving pedestrians in an emergency situation, evacuating a building in a fire, and just moving pedestrians around on a day-to-day basis in a subway station or a football stadium or whatever?
Certainly there's a lot of dual use. You use many of the same components. I think the primary difference is that in an emergency circumstance, the situation awareness of the occupants, their need to have information which is potentially affecting the life safety and the outcome of the event. So being able to communicate where the event is and what the appropriate action is in the context of the overall emergency management of the building really differentiates it from the everyday use of the circulation and usefulness of the circulation system.
And you opened up the conference yesterday. You had 5 areas that you talked about in your opening remarks. What were those 5 areas?
Well, we really are at a precipice here of really revolutionizing the way that people, in particular during emergency circumstances, get out of buildings during emergencies, particularly with the use of elevators. And what that gives us an opportunity to do is really focus, given that this is an opportunity to rethink the whole way of getting people out, what research do we need to do to maximize the impact that our research is having? So the first area is a more fundamental understanding of human behavior. There's a lot of myth and sort of misinformed science out there about what people do and during an emergency. Largely there's a Hollywood sort of perception that people panic during emergencies and that sort of thing, and we just simply know that not to be true from the research. So what we need to do is a better job of understanding the cognitive processes of people as they are confronted with information and as they make decisions during their evacuation process. We also need to begin to get data about actual emergencies. We've done a pretty good job of getting some information about building evacuations during fire drills or data about circulation and use of buildings during more routine circumstances. But the question that remains unresolved is how does that data, how does that information translate to real emergencies? Do people behave differently during real emergencies in ways that would make extrapolating the non-emergency results perhaps inappropriate?
And I imagine that could be a little difficult because emergencies by their nature aren't expected, aren't planned. What sources of data are there for for real actual emergencies to see how it matches up on the drills.
Certainly investigations are one of the primary ways. For example, at NIST, we did the World Trade Center investigation. And during that investigation, we had the opportunity to interview over 1,200 people who survived the ultimately what was the collapse of both towers. The Rhode Island nightclub fire gave us an opportunity to understand, for a different occupancy, in this case assembly occupancy, the process of reacting to obvious visual cues of the fire and getting out in that circumstance. There's a rich literature for the major disasters, whether it's the Who concert stampede, the MGM Grand Fire, where the large loss incidents are relatively well studied. The question remains, if you look at the evacuation losses in this country, it's largely a residential problem. And to some extent, that part of the problem, while it was studied in the 1970s, hasn't gotten quite the same attention. And so that's an area certainly where we want to look at, I think, the link between life safety and evacuation.
And the third area that you talked about yesterday?
It's to begin to understand variance in our community. We've done a disservice, I think, to ourselves and to the larger community by simplifying many of the scientific findings from the human experience of evacuation to averages or simplistic formula, when in fact, if you look at the underlying data, there's a tremendous amount of variance. That people move at a very wide range of speeds. They delay for different reasons for a wide range of times in initiating evacuation. That if we can begin to treat the evacuation process stochastically and on a risk-informed basis, perhaps having conversations about the probability or the likelihood that a building will be evacuated in a certain amount of time, rather than boiling it down and estimating an evacuation time, which we know isn't true, because you could take the same building and evacuate 3 days in a row and you'll get 3 different evacuation times. So we need to begin to have that conversation in a regulatory policy regime, in our scientific publications, and our communications with architects and the design community, that on a more statistically based rather than simple handbook correlations and calculations.
The fourth area?
That's to really move the community from a more prescriptive type approach, where it's go into the book, you find that the minimum stairwell width is 44 inches, the minimum hallway width is X, and treating egress as something that's simply cookbook, and beginning to develop the tools so that egress can be designed in a much more performance-oriented way, using strong data to get better outcomes, perhaps at lower total cost to the building, to greater utility on an everyday basis, and much more reliable and shorter evacuation times during emergencies.
And the fifth area?
And the fifth one is to have this community clearly embrace technology. There's a whole host of new technologies, whether it's technology for moving people. Elevators are a great example. Communities, starting with the American Society of Mechanical Engineers Working Group, are enabling elevators to be used during emergencies now by putting protective technologies in there to ensure that during the emergency they're going to work in a way that gets people out much more quickly. This will be absolutely fantastic for the disability community, because while the Americans with Disabilities Act did a great job of getting people into buildings, the very way they get in is taken away from them during an emergency, and this now gives them equal opportunity using elevators for egress during emergencies.
So that's going to be a substantial change from the way things have been run, because we're always told don't use elevators in emergencies.
Perhaps the most effective public education campaign in U.S. history is telling people not to use the elevators during emergencies, and the process of beginning to say, well, in some buildings we can, some buildings we still can't. That's going to be a tricky process that we're going to have to navigate very carefully. There's other technologies, including building technologies, where we can begin to integrate energy management systems, which know where people are because they can turn off on and off lights, manage the HVAC systems, security systems that clearly are tracking people throughout the buildings. Begin to integrate that with the life safety systems to give better situation awareness to incident commanders so that they can more effectively manage rescues in large incidents such as high-rise buildings or particularly large footprint buildings.
And how does the the research and the knowledge that's exchanged here get put into practice? What what fields are involved in making this affect day to day? What goes on and getting in and out of the subway station, getting in and out of the building in an emergency?
This is a highly multidisciplinary field. We have architects, we have engineers, we have people from transportation industry, and scientists and academics, all coming together to look at the problem from multiple different angles. Look at it from data collection for people movement, looking at it from the human behavior perspective, all in a way to document through a publication of our proceedings of the conference, so that the results can ultimately be used by the design community. What that's going to require is reaching out to groups like architects and engineers who actually are practicing this, and making sure that the results are translated for them. Taking the results of work that's presented here, taking it to the International Code Council, the National Fire Protection Association, and other standards developing organizations, and ensuring that as they have the public discourse of codes, that the best science is available to them as they debate what the appropriate levels of safety in our buildings are.
We're talking with Norman Groner, who's with the City University of New York. What is your research area?
My background is actually as a research psychologist, and I do human factors type of studies where you investigate how to make systems that work better for people, that are more usable and useful.
We're at the Pedestrian Evacuation Dynamics Conference. What are you here to talk about?
Well, I'm here to talk about how you can do crowd management in a way that does the sorts of things I'm talking about, how you can create systems that help people manage crowds, but help the people in the crowd realize their goals, as well as the people who are trying to run the event.
And when you do research in an area like this, what sort of real-world events have you looked at that could give you some ideas on how this might be done?
Well, part of the genesis for this is the documentation for the inauguration for Obama in January of 2009. It's an interesting event because it was very well planned. They had people with high levels of expertise who were working on the event, trying to plan it properly. And nonetheless, things still went wrong. So a lot of people have heard about the purple tunnel of doom and problems with the silver ticket holders and that type of thing. So despite all the really exemplary planning that went on, a lot of things still happened that they had a difficult time adapting to and handling during the actual event. Luckily, no real casualties, but a lot of people who suffered from a lot of discomfort.
And how would you approach an event like this with your ideas of crowd management? What sort of things would you be thinking of that might be done?
Well, the approach is based on what's sometimes called a cognitive systems approach, and it differs from the way people usually think about crowd management. And they usually think about it as causal systems, like a physical system. So they're trying to calculate what will cause people to move this way or that sort of way by moving barriers and that type of thing. But this is sort of a different approach. This is an approach where you're trying to be realistic about people's goals. You start with people's goals rather than trying to manipulate them using physical barriers. You try to develop a system that helps people realize what they want to try to have happen. There's a lot of complexity of goals in an event like the inauguration. Primary for a lot of people, for the people running the event, of course, is security. So they have to worry about the security for the president, and they worry about security for the VIP donors and for the crowd itself. But there's a lot of other things that are happening. For example, one of the principal goals for people who are attending the event is they want to have a good view of the inauguration. So they have goals that can conflict with the system goals of security and that type of thing. So part of the trick in the approach is how do you reconcile these goals? How do you build a system that allows everybody to try to maximize their accomplishment of what they're trying to have happen during the inauguration or any sort of a large event like that?
And when you're in a field where a lot of emphasis is put on physical design, the size and shape of the space, how do you get another concept added to that formula that you're dealing with, trying to meet people's goals rather than physically direct them one way or the other?
Well, it's not that the physical environment is unimportant, because it's central to anything that's going to happen, whether the event happens well or it doesn't happen. It's sort of more along the lines of how do you decide or figure out how to manipulate that physical environment. And a lot of it is how do you adapt during the event so that you can help people realize their goals, so that part of the idea of this cognitive systems approach is that cognitive is about people thinking and making decisions. So part of it is trying to design a system so that you have informational inputs about the physical environment, about potential hazards, about what people are trying to accomplish during the event, so that you can make adjustments in real time, so that everything works better and more smoothly. And part of those adjustments are likely to be often the physical environment, but other things could be the potential for developing signage. For example, people are trying to go to a better view. So during the inauguration, people are wandering around trying to figure out where can I get a good view. They're blocked from one particular location because it's already overcrowded, but they're not provided with any information about where they might relocate in order to get a better view of the inauguration. So the idea here is that how can, in addition to moving physical barriers, how can you provide information to people so that they can realize their goals better? And that can be done through signage. It can be done by providing information to security officers, the Capital City Police Department or National Guard members, and lots of volunteers, so that they can provide better instructions during the event.
We're in Richmond, Virginia, talking with Don Walker with the North American Handmade Bicycle Show. What is the show?
Show is a collection or a gathering of handmade bicycle frame builders and component makers. Anything that you would see on a high-end bicycle is welcome here.
And how long has the show been going on?
This is our 6th year.
How's interest grown over the years? How's it been going?
It really has grown. It's taken off. I mean, when the show first started, it was 23 of my closest friends, and then it's just grown. From that point, it just keeps on gathering up steam, and even I'm shocked at how well it's going.
Now, who's attending a show like this? Who all these people are filling up your aisles? Who are they?
That's a great question. It's handmade bicycle aficionados. People come from all walks of life that appreciate quality and craftsmanship, and they can draw their inspiration when they're on their next ride, thinking, wow, I'm probably going to go buy a new bike, and I really enjoyed meeting, Richard Sachs or Dario Pegoretti or Sasha White or whoever, and this is the people that are coming. They just love bicycles, and they want to be immersed in what the latest offerings from these great builders are.
What's been happening with the handmade bicycle business in the U.S. over recent decades? What's been going on?
Well, recent decades, I got into it in 1991, and there was a boom back then, and then it kind of had a good lull, and then we had a lot of new guys start coming in about 2000, 2003, something like that, and now it seems to be on a peak level where we've got some great builders and we've got some great products coming out, and and we're expanding our marketing reach into the normal realm of bicycles, if you will, and more people are becoming aware of what we do, and it's all just kind of a part of a vicious cycle that just propagates a better universe for the builders.
What are the hot spots for bike building in the U.S.?
Well, everybody knows about Portland, but one of the unsung heroes of places to go is actually Minneapolis. People don't realize that they got probably about 8 or 10 builders up there that are all high quality work and all excellent craftsmen, and that's a hotbed. Obviously, the Northeast, up in New England, there's a lot of builders up there. They might not be all in one city, but they're all fairly close together.
We're talking with Craig Calfee with Calfee Design. What is Calfee Design?
Well, we're a company that makes carbon fiber frames, bamboo frames, and sizer cycles.
Bamboo frames. A lot of people haven't heard of that. What's
It's a frame made of bamboo. We join the tubes together with sisal and epoxy, or hemp and epoxy, depending on where we get the frame. And the bikes are incredibly smooth riding and comfortable. They're like a racing bike or mountain bike, even a tandem.
And when someone's getting a custom bike, one of the most important things is getting it fit right.
Yes, getting any bike, even a regular $50 bike, it's important to get it fit right. That's the number one criteria that you want to have when deciding about what bike to buy. So we, at the higher end, we do fittings on a sizer cycle, which we happen to make we wanted to address a need in the marketplace for an easy-to-use sizer bike. So we make one that a lot of bike shops are buying now, and it allows you to determine the most comfortable position on the sizer, and then you can adjust your bike to match the sizer.
How many different measurements go into finding the right size of a bike?
Oh, about 8 measurements. Yeah, there's about 8 very particular measurements that you should dial in. A lot of fitting in lower cost bikes is what you can stand over, but that's just the beginning. That's just one parameter that is important. But there's top tube length and saddle height and stem length, the height of the handlebar off the ground, the right length of crank arm to use. They all can add to a better bicycle riding experience.
We're talking with Butch Boucher with Moot Cycles from Steamboat Springs, Colorado.
John?
What does your company do?
We manufacture titanium bicycle frames and titanium bicycle parts as well.
Now, what are the most common materials for bicycle frames?
Most common materials are probably right now, and we're in a high-end market more than anything else, but steel, aluminum, carbon fiber, and titanium is a smaller proportion, but still a very popular choice for a high-end bike.
Now, what are the characteristics of titanium that make it good for a high-end bike frame?
Well, from our standpoint, because we do about 1,000 frames a year, and we want to produce a high-end bike, it's the ability to build a high-quality feeling bike, a lightweight, strong, durable bike that we can also custom fit to a customer if we need to. The most appealing thing, though, in the long run is how the bike feels under you. It's kind of an intrinsic thing. It's hard to put into words, but the quality of the materials and the ride of the bike is what it's really about. Again, it's hard to put into words until you ride the bike. It's a sublime feeling. It's got a feeling of a life. It's got a liveliness to it. It's stiff but responsive. It's the most durable material you can get a bicycle made out of because it won't corrode. It really has a huge amount of resistance to impact. And it'll last forever. It's one of those magic materials. The drawback of it is very expensive, and it's a little bit more difficult to work with than some of the other materials.
How long has titanium been used for bicycles?
Since the 70s, there was a period in the 70s where there were some bikes made that were primarily for road racing, and they were very flexible. They didn't have the durability. The tubing, the materials weren't available to make as strong a bike as we can make today. There was a pause there for a while, and then in the 80s, titanium became back, and then in the 90s, it became very popular with a lot of mountain bike racing as well as road biking. But mountain biking really got titanium going because of its durability and, again, the strength and the ride quality. As we've progressed, it's kind of peaked and valleyed a little bit, and it's becoming more popular now because of its great durability and long-term value.
And the titanium industry didn't grow up around bicycles. Who took the lead in the titanium before bicyclists noticed it?
It was aerospace all the way. We follow aerospace. A typical, I believe, a Boeing 777 uses about 130,000 pounds of titanium in one airplane. Obviously, our bicycle frames weigh around 3 pounds, 2.5 pounds, so we're only using a very small amount in the whole bike industry. So we've actually had to follow on the footsteps or in the heels of the aerospace industry with the development of materials, and it's been very good for us. The American mills have actually recognized the bike industry as a viable way to sell materials. They can get a little bit more money per pound for it or per foot, but they can provide us with exactly the materials we need to build a good bicycle.
And what is it about titanium that makes it difficult to work with?
The most important things that we have to be aware of is machining it takes some patience. We need to machine it very carefully because the material can work harden, which is a phrase that if you use a dull tool, everything goes bad really fast. But the other thing that's very difficult is it has to be welded when we TIG weld it, which is a tungsten inert gas welding, and we have to weld it in the absence of oxygen or the absence of air. So we have to actually purge the tubing, the inside of the bike frame, with an inert gas. We have to coat the outside of it with an inert gas. Argon is used, and the material has to be prepared to be basically surgically clean before we ever start. Surgically maybe be an extreme, but we can't even have a greasy fingerprint on the material in order to weld it, or we'll have a contaminated weld that could be brittle. So it's a big challenge to weld. Once you overcome those challenges, it's actually quite nice to work with. It just requires a lot of patience and a lot of skill too. We have very skilled people who work with it.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.